absolutely certain that after the start of the war in Ukraine, the vast majority of you have heard countless times that Vladimir Putin is a dictator, a tyrant who doesn't give a damn about the opinion of his people. Yes, theoretically, Russia is a parliamentary democracy with periodic elections and a strong rule of law. That, at least, is what is repeated to us from the upper echelons of the Kremlin. In the same way that they also insist that it is the Western media that is being unreasonable when they constantly declare, time and again, that in Mother Russia, there is not even one iota of democracy. On our sister channel, VisualPolitik, subscribe below, we have told you about how in several of our videos, how everything points to the Russian regime having imprisoned, poisoned, or even enacted the falling out of the window accidentally of political dissidents in the government. And of course, if you murder or get rid of the political opposition, then how much faith can you expect people to have in your supposed democratic system? Now, this is VisualEconomik. The most interesting thing here, and that we will cover in this video, is not that the suspicions against the fake Russian democracy are just Hollywood movie plots. I mean, look at these headlines.
Voters watch polls in Russia and fraud is what they see. Putin's party wins election, marred by fraud claims.
Indeed, practically ever since Putin seized power in Russia, accusations of electoral fraud and manipulation have followed election after election. For example, after the 2016 legislative elections, the BBC published a video where a Russian polling station clerk could be seen stuffing a ballot box with apparently fake votes with the aim of adulterating the results. But wait, let's just stop for one moment, okay? How can we differentiate real news from the possible fake news or conspiracies that proliferate on the internet? In other words, in practically every moderately controversial election, there are accusations suggesting electoral fraud. The video we have just seen could very well have been an edited video or simply a scene taken out of context. Right? Even in the last US elections, we could all read thousands of news stories accusing Joe Biden's candidacy of electoral manipulation. Gradually, however, the courts and investigations have overturned this hypothesis. And today, no one, or almost no one, would dare to say that the United States does not have a solid democracy. So the question many of you may be asking now is, are the news stories accusing the Russian regime of electoral fraud true? Is Putin in power illegitimately? Well, VisualEconomik friends, the truth is that the VisualEconomik team, we have a very clear answer. Yes, without a doubt, Putin manipulates the elections in Russia, and what's more, he does it in a blatant way. In fact, he's been doing it for a very long time. Mind you, we're not saying this because we've read it on the BBC or in the New York Times or in any other Western media. We say it because of the official electoral data presented by the Kremlin itself, which presents unequivocal evidence of it being fraudulent. Now then, do you want to know why we are so blunt? Do you want to see how Putin systematically manipulates his elections? And do you want me to finish this video and never be able to visit Russia? Of course you do. And here today on VisualEconomik, we're going to give you all the details. So let's get cracking.
The crime maps.
Here's a question for you. In your country, how many people usually participate in elections? For example, in the last US elections, the percentage of voters who went to the vote was close to 62%. Similarly, in the 2019 Spanish elections, the percentage was also similar, around 66%, right? Let's say, more or less, that in almost all Western countries, the number of citizens who participate in elections is usually between 50 and 70%. However, Russia is a very, very particular case. Take a close look at this image. In this map of coloured dots, each dot represents a polling station in the 2012 Russian elections. The further to the right the point is, the higher the voter turnout in the table it represents. Whereas, the higher that same point is, the more votes went to Vladimir Putin. As you can see, in most polling stations, there were normal participation percentages of between 50 and 70%, nothing unusual. However, now I want you to take a closer look at one particular detail. There is a significant group of polling stations where, almost inexplicably, the turnout was 100%. All of the citizens of those polling stations, absolutely every single one of them, went to vote. And not only that, but it seems that all of them opted for Putin's candidacy. Specifically, the Russian president's party took 3 times more votes in polling stations with turnouts close to 100% than the rest of the polling stations where the turnout rates were normal. It's already quite a coincidence, don't you think? The worst thing is that this is something that does not happen in any democratic country in the world. Graphs of points like the one we have just shown you also exist for a number of countries such as Australia, Canada, and Switzerland, and in none of these countries is anything remotely similar to what is happening in Putin's country being witnessed. The question is, why is this happening? What happened at those suspicious polling stations? If this is due to Putin's manipulation, how on earth is he doing it? Well, how would you feel if we told you the answer to this question can be known thanks to the fact that a Russian NGO set a trap in the electoral system in order to catch the manipulation red-handed? Do you want to know what the trap was set? Of course you do, so let's take a look.
A trap for Putin.
In 2012, just before the elections on the same period, the Russian NGO, the Citizen Observer, had serious suspicions about impending electoral fraud in Moscow polling stations. Therefore, in an attempt to uncover this fraud, they carried out the following plan. On election day, 156 observers infiltrated randomly selected polling stations in order to monitor the ballot boxes and check for cheating. The plan turned out more or less as expected. The vast majority of observers were able to access and monitor the polling stations without problems. However, 35 of them were expelled by the Russian authorities before any conclusions could be drawn. Local customs, I suppose, right? In any case, the question you may already be wondering is, what did the observers see? Did they manage to catch the fraud while it was going down? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but no. They didn't see anything. Everything happened normally and without anything suspicious happening. But don't worry, because in reality, this was all part of the NGO's plan. Think about it. If a forger wants to stuff a ballot box with fake votes in favor of Putin, if there is an observer who's watching that same ballot box constantly, then the forger will not be able to manipulate anything without getting caught. You could say that in the polling stations where observers were present, the process was more supervised and safer than in the polling stations where there was no one watching. So no, in the polling stations with observers, no one introduced false votes. Now, what happened in the rest of the polling stations where there was no one watching, and was there any manipulation? Well, VisualEconomik fans, right in here are the key issues. If the results in the polling stations where there was no one watching were to give many more votes to Putin than in the polling stations where there were observers monitoring, it would be black and white. There's definitely manipulation happening here. So, what was the result? In the polling stations where there was no one watching, there was 11% more votes for Putin than in the polling stations where there were observers. At the same time, absolutely all of Putin's rivals got lower percentages of the vote in those same polling stations. But pay attention, because it actually doesn't even end there. Similar to what we saw in the dot plot at the beginning of the video, in the allegedly rigged polling stations, the percentage of participation was, on average, up to 6.5 points higher, which, it seems, points to a pretty clear theory. One of Putin's main methods of manipulating elections involves the introduction of fake votes at the ballot box. Fake votes that in turn increase the turnout figures. However, even if this evidence was already more than enough to seriously doubt Russian democracy, there was still the clearest and most convincing proof of all. Check this out.
Odd or even?
In 2020, a referendum was held in Russia to decide whether Putin could continue as president of the country, despite the fact that the legal term limit in force up to that time did not allow him to do so. As you can imagine, our protagonist won the referendum by a landslide, which enabled him to continue being president until at least 2036. In view of all of this, what can I say? Doesn't look like this guy is going to lose an election anytime soon. Be that as it may, the most interesting thing about all of this is that in that referendum, as you might expect, very strange things also happened that point directly to electoral fraud. Let me explain. The percentage of voters registered in favor of Putin's proposal was practically the same in many polling stations. For example, in the Dagestan district, which is about 52 polling stations, exactly 93% of voters in almost all polling stations in the area voted in favor of Putin. In a way, it was as if all the citizens of the region had agreed to vote in favor of the Russian president in exactly the same proportions as the rest of the electorate. As many of you may be thinking, such similar figures between different polling stations are a complete statistical anomaly. Normally, even if the results were similar, the distribution of votes would have been much more disparate, more similar to one like this. Well, according to Manuel Baguez, the economist who calculated the simulation you have just seen on the screen, a result as uniform as the one recorded in the Russian polling stations would have a less than 1 in a trillion chance of happening. In other words, there was almost guaranteed manipulation by the book. Now be careful, because this thing goes even further. In that same referendum, it turns out that some Russian manipulators became more refined in an attempt to better hide their fraud. In the Klintovsky district, instead of recording the same percentage of votes in all polling stations, the manipulators changed the technique as follows. In the even-numbered polling stations, the percentage of votes in favor of Putin recorded was exactly 90%. However, in the odd-numbered polling stations, the percentage chosen was 91%. So, I guess they could no longer be accused of voting the same way everywhere, could they? Well, no. What happened is that the distribution of votes was as follows. I don't know about you, but rather than hiding the fraud, making the vote identical depending on whether the polling station was numbered odd or even, what it did was to demonstrate the elections were fair and democratic. Not. In short, it seems to me that after seeing all of this, hardly any other theory, apart from electoral fraud, can explain the puzzling data that we have shown you. But the question now is over to you. What do you think about the Russian electoral data? Do you find any other earthly explanation for such coincidences other than electoral manipulation? Do you believe the news and videos warning of fraud in the Western media, or do you think they are fake news? You can leave your answer in the comments below. And of course, don't forget that here on VisualEconomik, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to our channel and hit the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it so we know. And as always, I'll see you next time.